I was standing at the stove stirring a pot of soup that had been simmering too long when my son's voice drifted in from the living room. "Mom, you don't have to do all this anymore," Ryan said gently, the way people speak when they think they're being kind. "We can grab something on the way home next time." I didn't turn around right away. I kept stirring, slow and steady, watching the carrots rise and sink. "I like cooking," I said, "and you're here. That's reason enough." There was a pause, the kind you don't notice unless you've lived long enough to recognize it. Then the television volume went up a notch and the conversation moved on. I didn't think much of it at the time. I wish I could say I did. "My name is Evelyn Carter. I am 71 years old and I have lived in this house for 43 of those years. Every inch of it carries my fingerprints. The faint groove on the kitchen counter where my husband once leaned every morning to lace his boots. The narrow stair that creaks because Ryan used to jump down it as a boy, no matter how many times I told him not to. This house did not come to me easily. It was not a gift. It was earned, paid for, repaired, and protected through years, when quitting would have been simpler. When my husband passed 8 years ago, the house went quiet in a way that startled me. Not sad quiet, empty quiet. The kind that makes you hear your own breathing at night. For a while, people checked in on me constantly. Neighbors brought casseroles. Ryan called every evening. Marissa stopped by with Noah, who was still small enough then to climb into my lap without asking. But time moves on, even when grief lingers. I learned how to manage the quiet. I paid the bills myself. I mowed the lawn when my knees allowed it and hired help when they didn't. I learned which pipes rattled in winter and which window stuck in summer. I didn't want sympathy. I wanted my life to keep its shape. Ryan was a good boy. People always said that, and it was true in the way most things are true until they aren't simple anymore. He was polite, smart, and gentle when he was young. After his father died, he tried to step in, but he didn't know how. He would ask, "You okay, Mom?" And when I said yes, he accepted it too easily. I don't blame him for that. He had his own life pulling at him. A wife, a job, a child who needed shoes that fit, and lunches packed on time. Marissa came into our lives with energy. She was efficient, organized, and very good at making plans. She remembered birthdays and liked things done a certain way. I respected that. Families need someone like her. She was the one who suggested we start having Sunday dinners again, like we used to. I was glad for that. I liked having a reason to set the table for more than one. I still helped where I could, not because anyone asked, but because that's what mothers do. If Ryan mentioned money was tight one month, I'd slip him a grocery card and tell him I'd picked it up on sale. When Marissa went back to work after Noah was born, I watched him twice a week so they wouldn't have to rush. I never kept count. I didn't want to. Love isn't a ledger. This house was always open to them. Noah knew where the cookie jar was without asking. Ryan still reached for the light switch in the hallway the way he always had. On the surface, nothing was wrong. We looked like a family that had found its rhythm. But even then, there were moments that felt slightly off. Not sharp enough to hurt, just enough to make me notice. Ryan started asking if I was tired more often. Marissa would comment on how quiet the house must feel now. Once, she said, almost casually, "It must be a lot for you to keep up with all this on your own." She gestured around the living room, smiling. I smiled back and said, "I manage." I meant it. I was not confused. I was not lonely in the way people like to imagine older women are lonely. I had friends. I had church on Sundays and coffee on Wednesdays with Gloria, who had known me since before my hair went gray. I had routines that grounded me. I had memories that comforted me. Most of all, I had my sense of self. I knew who I was because I had been her for a very long time. If I could go back, I might linger longer on those early moments. The way Marissa watched me when she thought I wasn't looking. The way Ryan's concerns sometimes felt rehearsed, as if he were repeating lines he'd practiced. At the time, I chalked it up to worry, to adulthood, to the natural shift that happens when children become parents themselves. I never imagined that the life I built, brick by brick, could be seen as something waiting to be claimed. That's the part people don't understand. I didn't fear losing my house because it was valuable. I feared losing it because it was mine. It was proof that I had lived, worked, loved, and survived. It was the last place where no one told me what was best for me. And standing there that evening, stirring soup while my son sat behind me and spoke like I was already fading, I had no idea how close I was to being treated like a problem to be solved. At that moment, I was still a mother, still trusting, still assuming that love would be enough to keep everything intact. I didn't know then that this was the beginning of something else entirely. The first time I noticed it, it was so small I almost dismissed it. Marissa was standing at the kitchen counter, flipping through a stack of mail I had left neatly arranged beside my purse. I hadn't asked her to do that. I hadn't even mentioned the mail. But there she was, sorting envelopes into 2 piles with quick, confident movements. "I figured I'd help you tidy this up," she said without looking at me. "Some of this stuff just adds unnecessary stress." I smiled politely and reached for the pile, but she held it just a second longer than necessary before handing it over. "Bills can be overwhelming," she added, "especially when there are so many." "I've been paying them a long time," I said lightly. "They don't scare me yet." She laughed, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. From then on, the comments came dressed as care. Ryan would call in the evenings and ask questions that sounded thoughtful on the surface, but landed strangely once the words settled. "Did you remember to take your medication today?" he asked once. "I don't take any medication." When I told him that, he paused, then said, "Right, of course. I just meant, in general." Marissa started phrasing things differently, too. She no longer said, "Your house looks nice, but the house looks nice today." She stopped asking if I wanted help and began offering it as if it were already decided. "I'll come by on Thursday and take you grocery shopping," she said one week. Not, "Would you like me to?" Just, "I will." When I hesitated, she tilted her head and smiled. "It's safer that way." Safer. That word began to appear everywhere. The stairs were unsafe. The driveway was unsafe when it rained. Cooking alone was unsafe. Driving after dark was unsafe. Even the bathtub, which I had stepped in and out of for decades without incident, was suddenly a concern. "You hear so many stories," Marissa said one afternoon as she wiped down the counter I had already cleaned. "One fall and everything changes." Ryan nodded in agreement, his eyes fixed on me, searching my face as if he expected to see confusion or fear reflected there. I felt neither. I felt watched. What unsettled me most wasn't what they said, but when they stopped saying it. Conversations would trail off the moment I entered the room. Phones would be turned face down on the table. Ryan would step outside to take calls, lowering his voice as if discussing something private or important. Once, I caught a glimpse of Marissa's screen before she locked it. I didn't see words, just a long message thread, and my own name typed more than once. At dinner, they spoke over me without realizing it. If I told a story, Marissa would gently correct a detail. "I think it was actually 3 years ago," she'd say, smiling, even when I knew it wasn't. Ryan would glance between us and change the subject. I began to feel like a guest in my own home. One Sunday after church, Marissa suggested we all sit down together. She clasped her hands in front of her and leaned forward, her voice warm and steady. "We've just been talking," she said, "about how much you've done for us over the years. We want to make sure you're taken care of, too." "I am taken care of," I replied. Ryan cleared his throat. "Of course you are, Mom. We just mean long term." There it was again. That careful phrasing, not now, later, someday soon. They spoke about friends whose parents had waited too long, about families who hadn't planned properly and regretted it, about how difficult things became when no one was officially in charge. Marissa used the word organized repeatedly, as if my life were a cluttered drawer that needed straightening. "You don't want strangers making decisions for you," she said softly. "You want family." I nodded, but something in my chest tightened. Family, I had always believed, was a shield. Lately it felt more like a set of hands closing in, gentle but firm. The smallest moment, the one that stayed with me, happened on an ordinary afternoon. I came home from coffee with Gloria and found Marissa in my bedroom, standing by the dresser. One of my folders lay open on the bed. "Oh," she said quickly, startled. "I was just looking for a pen." A pen. From my dresser. Beside my personal papers. I didn't say anything. I simply picked up the folder and closed it. She stepped back, her smile returning too fast. "We worry about you," she said. "That's all." Concern, I realized then, is the most believable mask for control. It sounds like love. It looks like kindness. And it gives people permission to step where they otherwise would not dare. That night, lying in bed, I replayed every interaction of the past few months, not with anger, but with clarity. The pattern was there now, clear as day. They weren't asking how I felt. They were checking how much space I had left to push me. I didn't confront them. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. I had lived long enough to know that people who are certain they are right will only dig in deeper when challenged. Instead, I watched. I listened. And I began to understand that what was happening had very little to do with my safety and everything to do with my silence. And I decided, quietly, that I would not stay silent forever. The questions started arriving with a new level of confidence, as if the earlier groundwork had already been laid and they were simply moving to the next step. Ryan brought it up one evening while we were clearing the table. He spoke casually, like he was commenting on the weather. "Do you know where you keep the deed to the house?" he asked. I paused with a plate in my hands. "In the file cabinet," I said, "where it's always been." He nodded too quickly. "Right, that's good. It's just important information." Important to whom, I wondered, but I didn't ask. Instead, I watched as he dried his hands on a towel and glanced toward Marissa, who stood by the sink, pretending to scroll through her phone. They didn't exchange words, but something passed between them all the same. A look, a signal. After that, the questions came in waves, never too many at once, just enough to feel intentional. Marissa mentioned wills one afternoon while Noah was doing homework at the dining table. "A friend of mine went through a nightmare when her mother passed," she said. "No will, no clear plan. Everything got tied up in court." "I have a will," I replied. "It's been updated." She smiled brightly. "That's great. You're so responsible." Then, after a beat, "Does Ryan know what's in it?" The way she asked made my fingers tighten around my coffee cup. "He doesn't need to," I said evenly. "That's the point of having one." She didn't argue. She never did. She just nodded, like she was taking mental notes. A week later, Ryan called me during his lunch break. His voice was careful, practiced. "Mom, have you ever thought about power of attorney?" "I've thought about a lot of things," I said. "Why?" "Well," he hesitated, then continued. "Sometimes hospitals need someone to speak on your behalf. It's just paperwork. A formality." "A formality gives someone authority," I replied. "Those aren't the same thing." There was silence on the line. Then he laughed softly. "You always were sharp." Sharp, not capable, not independent. Sharp, like something that could dull. They began sharing stories about people who had done this the smart way. A neighbor's aunt who added her son to the deed so probate wouldn't be an issue. A co-worker's mother who made her daughter power of attorney just in case. Every story ended the same way, with family stepping in and everything working out beautifully. What they didn't say, I noticed, was what happened to the mother afterward. Marissa suggested lightly that it might be easier if Ryan's name were added to the house for continuity. Continuity, as if I were a temporary tenant in my own life. It would make things simpler, she said, if something happens. That phrase again. If something happens. It hovered over every conversation like a quiet threat. Then came the question that made my stomach tighten for reasons I couldn't yet fully explain. "Do you keep your documents all together?" Marissa asked one morning. "Passwords, bank info, that sort of thing?" "Yes," I said, "I do." "Wouldn't it be smart," she continued, "to have copies? So someone can step in if needed." Someone, not Ryan, not family. Someone. The word slipped out too easily. I realized then that these weren't questions born of concern. They were inventory checks. They were measuring what I had, where it was, and how quickly it could be accessed. Even the timing felt deliberate. They always asked when I was busy, distracted, or tired, never when I was fully present, never in front of others. Always quietly, politely, as if politeness made the intrusion acceptable. I began to answer carefully. I shared nothing new. I confirmed nothing specific. I watched how they reacted to my restraint. That's when I noticed something else. When I didn't give them what they wanted, the warmth cooled. The smiles thinned. Marissa's tone sharpened just a fraction. Ryan became impatient, sighing as if I were being unnecessarily difficult. "Mom," he said once, frustration slipping through. "We're just trying to help." Help, I thought, should not feel like pressure. By then the picture was forming clearly in my mind. They weren't planning for my future. They were positioning themselves for it. And in their version of that future, my role seemed increasingly small. I went to bed that night with the uneasy understanding that knowledge had become currency, and they were trying, piece by piece, to take it from me. I didn't stop them. Not yet. I needed to see how far they were willing to go. The moment it became clear didn't arrive with shouting or confrontation. It arrived quietly, the way truths often do when you aren't looking for drama, only understanding. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind that feels suspended between obligations. The house was still. I had just come back from the pharmacy and set my purse on the entry table when I heard voices coming from the garage. Ryan and Marissa had arrived earlier than expected. At first, I thought nothing of it. I moved slowly down the hallway, my shoes still on, my mind already on the kettle I planned to put on. Then I heard my name. Not spoken sharply, not whispered either. Spoken plainly. Practiced. "I'm just saying," Marissa said, her voice carrying clearly through the open doorway. "Once the house is transferred, she can't change her mind." I stopped walking. Ryan sighed. "I know. I just don't want to rush her." "You're not rushing," Marissa replied. "We've been patient, but if we wait too long, it gets harder. You know that." There was a brief pause. Then Ryan said something that settled into my chest like a stone. "She'll understand eventually. Assisted living might actually be better for her." Assisted living. Not if. Not maybe. Already decided. Already placed neatly into their future. I didn't step forward. I didn't retreat. I stayed exactly where I was, one hand resting on the wall, listening as if my life depended on it. Because in a way, it did. "We just need her signature," Marissa continued. "After that, everything's cleaner. The house is secure. We can move forward." "Forward," Ryan echoed, less certain now. "For Noah," she added quickly. "For us." There it was. The justification, wrapped in family, polished with purpose. My first instinct was disbelief, not denial, but something quieter. A refusal to accept that these words belonged to the people I loved. For a moment, I wondered if I'd misunderstood, if context might soften it, if I was hearing fragments of a conversation that made sense when whole. But then Marissa said, "We'll say it's about safety. People understand that. people, not me. I felt something shift inside me then. Not anger, not fear, clarity. They weren't talking with me. They were talking around me, planning a version of my life that didn't include my consent, only my compliance. I stepped back slowly, deliberately, careful not to make a sound. I went into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, my coat still on, my heart steady in a way that surprised me. I thought of all the times Marissa had said, "We worry about you." All the times Ryan had asked, just in case something happens. All the careful questions about documents, deeds, authority. It wasn't concern. It was preparation. I sat there for a long time, listening to the muffled sounds of them moving through the house, laughing at something trivial, completely unaware that the ground beneath their plan had just shifted, because I was finally standing on it. When they came inside, I greeted them the same way I always did. I smiled. I asked if they wanted tea. Marissa kissed my cheek. Ryan avoided my eyes for just a second longer than usual. That second told me everything. Later that evening, after they left, I walked through the house slowly. I ran my fingers along the banister. I stood in the doorway of the room where Ryan had slept as a boy, the walls still faintly marked with where his height had been penciled year after year. This was not a place to be handed over. This was not a problem to be solved. I went into my bedroom and opened the file cabinet. I didn't pull anything out. I just looked at the folders, my name typed neatly on the tabs, my handwriting on the margins. Proof of a life managed, not misplaced. I thought about confronting them, demanding explanations, asking how they could speak about me as if I were already gone. But I didn't. People who believe they are acting for your own good rarely hear resistance as reason. They hear it as confirmation that you're unfit to decide. So instead, I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, alone, letting the truth settle. They were not planning to help me age. They were planning to remove me. And once I understood that, everything else became very simple. I didn't cry that night. I didn't pray for guidance. I didn't even feel particularly sad. What I felt was resolve. If they believed I was no longer capable of protecting myself, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. I didn't sleep much that night, but it wasn't because my thoughts were racing. It was because something inside me had gone very still. There is a difference between worry and clarity. Worry spins in circles. Clarity points in one direction and waits for you to catch up. By morning, I knew exactly what I needed to do, and just as importantly, what I must not do. I did not confront Ryan. I did not question Marissa. I did not let on, even for a second, that I had heard anything at all. Instead, I moved through the next few days exactly as I always had. I cooked. I answered calls. I watched Noah after school and listened to him talk about a class project as if nothing in the world had shifted. But inside, I was no longer participating blindly. I was observing. I noticed how carefully Marissa chose her words now, how she tested small suggestions and waited to see if I pushed back. I noticed how Ryan watched my reactions more than he listened to my answers. I noticed how often the word safety came up, how often they framed my independence as something fragile. I began writing things down, not dramatically, not like a detective, just dates, phrases, who said what and when. I didn't know yet if I would need it, but something told me that memory alone would not be enough if this went where I suspected it would. The first person I spoke to was Gloria. We met for coffee on Wednesday morning, the same booth we'd sat in for years. She took one look at my face and set her cup down. "All right," she said quietly. "What's going on?" I told her only the facts, no emotion, no conclusions, just what had been said, what had been asked, and what I had overheard in the garage. Gloria listened without interrupting. When I finished, she nodded once. "Evelyn," she said, "this isn't concern. This is positioning." That word settled something in me. Positioning. It explained the patience, the politeness, the careful steps. You don't rush a move like this, you line it up. Gloria reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You need an estate attorney. Not tomorrow. Today. She gave me a name before I could ask. Denise Holloway. I made the appointment that afternoon. Denise's office was modest, calm and quiet, in a way that immediately put me at ease. No rushed energy, no condescension. She shook my hand, looked me in the eye, and said, "Tell me what's been happening." Again, I stuck to facts, dates, language, requests. Denise didn't flinch once. When I finished, she leaned back slightly and said, "Mrs. Carter, what you're describing is something I see more often than people want to admit. It usually starts with concern, then paperwork, then pressure." I swallowed. "So I'm not imagining this." "No," she said gently. "You're recognizing it early." That mattered. Early meant options. We went through my documents together. The deed, the will, the bank accounts. Denise asked precise questions. Who had access to what? Who knew what existed? Who had been asking for information? When she mentioned power of attorney again, this time in a clear, legal context, I understood the danger fully. "Once someone has it," she said, "they can legally speak for you, even over your objections, if they argue incapacity." I felt a chill, not from fear, but from how close that line was. Denise laid out a plan, not a dramatic one, a quiet one. We would place the house into an irrevocable trust, one that ensured I retained full rights to live there for the rest of my life, no matter what anyone else wanted. We would update my will with language so precise it left no room for interpretation. We would assign medical decision-making to a neutral professional, not family, so no one could claim they were just stepping in. Most importantly, we would do it all quickly and cleanly. "This isn't about punishing anyone," Denise said. "It's about removing leverage." That word again, leverage. I signed documents with a steady hand, not because it didn't hurt, but because I understood what was at stake. Each signature felt like closing a door I had once believed would never need locking. Afterward, I sat in my car for a long moment before driving home. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired and sad and strangely relieved. That evening, Ryan called. "Hey, Mom," he said. "Just checking in." "I'm fine," I replied. "How's work?" He hesitated. "Good, busy." We talked about nothing. The weather, Noah's school, dinner plans. I could hear Marissa in the background, faint but present. When I hung up, I realized something important. They had no idea the ground had shifted. Over the next week, I finished the rest quietly. I redirected my mail. I updated account alerts. I made copies of everything and stored them somewhere no one else knew about. I told Denise to keep originals on file. At home, I stayed exactly the same. I did not become cold. I did not withdraw affection. I did not suddenly grow suspicious. People often think preparation looks like distance. It doesn't. It looks like normalcy. Marissa came by one afternoon and mentioned, casually, "We should really sit down and talk about some paperwork soon." I smiled. "We can," I said, "when the time is right." She studied my face, searching for something. Finding nothing, she nodded. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and thought about how strange it was that protecting myself felt like betrayal, while planning to remove me from my own home had felt, to them, like care. I understood then that this wasn't about family roles anymore. It was about boundaries, and boundaries, once drawn, don't need defending with words. They hold on their own. And when the moment came, and I knew it would, I would be ready, quietly, completely. They chose a Saturday, not a work day, not a rushed evening. Saturday morning, when people are softer, when the week hasn't hardened them yet. Marissa arrived first, carrying a leather folder tucked neatly under her arm like an accessory. Ryan followed a few minutes later, empty-handed, his expression already strained. I knew before they sat down. Marissa placed the folder carefully on the coffee table, aligning it with the edge as if order alone could make what was inside acceptable. "We were hoping we could talk for a few minutes," she said, her voice calm, practiced, "just to get everyone on the same page." Ryan sat beside her, leaning forward with his hands clasped. He didn't look at me right away. I nodded and took my usual chair, the one by the window. The light was good there. I like to see people clearly when they spoke to me. Marissa opened the folder. Inside were papers, neatly stacked, clipped, and labeled. I recognized the format immediately. Legal documents, the kind designed to look official enough that people stop asking questions. "This isn't anything scary," she began. "It's really just formalizing what we've already talked about." I waited. Ryan finally spoke. "Mom, this is about making sure everything's handled properly, for the future." There it was again. The future. Always spoken as if I wouldn't be part of it. Marissa slid the first page toward me. "This just gives Ryan authority to help you if something happens. It avoids complications. Hospitals, banks. You know how these things can get." I glanced down without touching it. "And the house?" I asked. They exchanged a look, quick but unmistakable. "Well," Marissa said smoothly, "this would add Ryan to the deed, not taking anything from you, just simplifying things." Simplifying. Ryan cleared his throat. "It's not like we'd ever do anything without you, Mom. This is just practical." Practical for whom? I wondered. Marissa leaned in slightly, lowering her voice as if sharing something intimate. "After all we do for you, it just makes sense that we're prepared. You wouldn't want Noah dealing with confusion someday." There it was, the guilt, delivered gently, wrapped in concern, handed to me like a favor. I looked at my son then, really looked at him. "Did you read these?" I asked. He hesitated. Marissa went over them. "So you didn't." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I nodded slowly. "I see." Marissa's smile tightened. "Evelyn, this isn't about control, it's about safety. You know we worry." I folded my hands in my lap. "Worry doesn't require my signature." The temperature in the room shifted. Just slightly, enough to feel it. Ryan's voice sharpened. "Why are you being difficult?" I met his eyes. "I'm not." Marissa sighed, the sound heavy with rehearsed patience. "You're overthinking this. Everyone does it this way." "Everyone?" I asked. "Or everyone you know?" Her jaw set for just a second before she recovered. "This protects everyone," she insisted. "You included." I stood then, not abruptly, just calmly, and walked to the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water, took a sip, and returned to my chair. "I've had these reviewed," I said evenly. Silence. Ryan blinked. "Reviewed by who?" "Counsel." Marissa's hand tightened on the folder. "You didn't tell us that." I didn't need to. Her voice cooled instantly. And I won't be signing anything today." Ryan's face flushed. "Mom?" "No," I said gently, raising one hand. "Listen to me. I understand what these documents do. I understand the authority they give, and I understand why you want them signed." Marissa leaned back, crossing her arms. "So you're choosing a house over your family?" I felt something inside me harden, not into anger, but into certainty. "I'm choosing myself over being erased," I said. Ryan pushed his chair back slightly. "This is unbelievable. After everything we've done." "After everything I've done," I corrected quietly. The room felt smaller then, as if the walls themselves were listening. Marissa snapped the folder shut. "Fine," she said coldly. "If you won't do this willingly, we'll have to explore other options." I held her gaze. "You should do whatever you feel is appropriate. So will I." Ryan looked between us, panic flickering now beneath his frustration. This doesn't have to get ugly. I stood again, this time signaling the end. Then it won't. They left shortly after, the folder still under Marissa's arm, but heavier now. Ryan avoided my eyes as he walked out. Marissa didn't. When the door closed behind them, I didn't sit down right away. I walked through the house instead, slow and deliberate. Past the photos on the wall, past the bookshelf I'd built with my husband, past the front door they had just walked through, assuming it would always open for them. They had come expecting compliance. What they found instead was resistance, quiet, informed, and immovable. And I knew then that the next step would not be a conversation. It would be an attempt, and I was ready for it. The attempt came faster than I expected. 3 days later, I received a message from Ryan asking if we could clear the air with a neutral third party present. He framed it as concern, as he always did, but the wording was different now, formal, cautious, carefully chosen. Marissa followed up an hour later with a separate message suggesting we all meet at a law office to avoid misunderstandings. That was when I knew they believed they still had ground to stand on. I agreed without hesitation. The meeting was scheduled for Friday morning at a small conference room downtown. Marissa arrived early, dressed sharply, her folder back under her arm, thicker this time. Ryan followed, restless, checking his phone every few seconds. With them was a young attorney I didn't recognize, polite, confident, and already speaking as if decisions had been made. They were mid-conversation when the door opened again. Denise walked in. She didn't rush. She didn't announce herself loudly. She simply placed her briefcase on the table and took the seat beside me, nodding once in greeting. The effect was immediate. Marissa's voice faltered. Ryan straightened, suddenly alert. "I represent Mrs. Evelyn Carter," Denise said calmly. "Shall we begin?" The other attorney smiled, professional but dismissive. "Of course. We're just here to discuss some family planning matters." "Denise," returned the smile, but her eyes didn't soften. "Planning is only effective when all parties understand the legal reality." Marissa slid her folder forward. "We were hoping to revisit the power of attorney discussion. There seems to have been some confusion." "There isn't," Denise replied, opening her own folder. "Mrs. Carter has already executed a comprehensive estate plan." She placed several documents on the table and turned them so everyone could see. The room went quiet. "These documents establish an irrevocable trust-holding title to Mrs. Carter's home," Denise continued. "Mrs. Carter retains full lifetime residency rights. No transfer of ownership can occur without her consent, which is no longer possible under the trust terms." Ryan leaned forward. "Wait, what?" Denise didn't look at him. "Additionally, Mrs. Carter has updated her will, designated an independent medical advocate, and restricted any third-party authority over her financial or personal decisions." Marissa's face drained of color. "That can't be right." "It is," Denise said evenly. "All documents were executed, notarized, and filed prior to your most recent requests." The other attorney flipped through the pages, his expression changing with each turn. His confidence faded quickly, replaced by a tight frown. "You didn't mention this," he said to Marissa. She snapped, "Because I didn't know." Ryan looked at me then, really looked at me, as if seeing me clearly for the first time in months. "Mom, when did you do this?" I met his gaze. "When I realized I needed to." Marissa's composure cracked. "So this was your plan?" she demanded. "You went behind our backs?" Denise spoke before I could. Mrs. Carter acted within her legal rights to protect herself. No deception occurred. "This is unbelievable," Marissa said, her voice rising now. "We were just trying to help." "Help doesn't require stripping someone of autonomy," Denise replied. The other attorney closed his folder with a soft thud. "Given these documents," he said carefully, "there's no basis for pursuing power of attorney or property transfer." Ryan sank back in his chair. His hands trembled slightly. "So that's it?" "That's it," Denise confirmed. Marissa's frustration turned sharp. "So you're choosing a house over your own family?" I spoke then, my voice steady. "I'm choosing not to disappear quietly." Silence followed. Not the awkward kind, but the heavy kind that settles when a story collapses under the weight of truth. The meeting ended shortly after. There was nothing left to negotiate, no leverage, no authority. Just the realization that the door they thought was open had been closed long before they reached it. In the hallway, Marissa pulled me aside. Her tone dropped, urgent now. "This isn't over," she said. "You've made a mistake." I looked at her calmly. "No," I said. I corrected one. Ryan didn't say a word as they walked away. He looked smaller somehow, diminished not by loss, but by exposure. In the weeks that followed, the fallout spread quietly. Family members who had been told I was confused stopped calling. Friends who had heard whispers began asking questions. When those questions reached Marissa and Ryan, answers became harder to maintain. The story they'd prepared, the one where they were stepping in out of love, no longer held up. Marissa grew cold, distant. Ryan stopped visiting altogether. I stayed where I had always been, in my home. The house felt different once the noise stopped. Not emptier, quieter in a way that felt earned. For the first few weeks after the meeting, Ryan didn't call at all. No casual check-ins, no updates about Noah. Marissa sent one message, brief and carefully worded, asking if I was open to revisiting things once emotions settled. I didn't respond. I had learned that silence, when used correctly, says more than explanation ever could. When Ryan finally did reach out, it wasn't to apologize. It was to inform me that they'd be giving me space. The way he said it made it sound like a kindness he was granting, not a distance he was choosing. I accepted it without comment. The visits stopped. The Sunday dinners disappeared. Noah came by once more, quiet and unsure, hugging me longer than usual before Marissa called him back to the car. After that, even those moments became rare. I understood what was happening. Children become leverage when adults lose control. It hurt, but not in the way people expect. What hurt wasn't the absence. It was the realization that my presence had only been welcome when it was convenient. Once I stopped being manageable, I stopped being included, and yet I was still here. I stayed in my home. I woke up in my bed. I made my coffee the way I always had, in the same chipped mug my husband used to tease me about. I repainted the spare room, a soft, clean color that made the light feel gentler. I planted new flowers along the fence, ones that would come back every year whether anyone remembered to water them or not. Gloria came by more often. So did neighbors I'd waved to for years but never really talked with. When people heard pieces of what had happened, they didn't ask for details. They just showed up, sometimes with pie, sometimes with company, sometimes with nothing more than time. I realized then that family isn't always the people you raised. Sometimes it's the people who see you clearly when others don't. Ryan never asked me to explain myself, and I never offered. There was nothing left to justify. A relationship that depends on surrender isn't love. It's control wearing a familiar face. I don't know what he tells himself now, or what Marissa believes about how things turned out. I stopped trying to understand their version of the story. I only needed to live mine. This house still holds my history, my marriage, my motherhood, my mistakes, my strength. It holds me. I didn't scream, I didn't fight. I didn't lose myself trying to be heard. I stood where I had always stood, and that was enough. I didn't lose my son, he lost his mother.